Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast, IDP edition. I'm John Macri, and I'll be going over the top IDP takeaways from Week 11, immediately following a wild Sunday night football game, but also a week that kind of continued to change the landscape of IDP because, as we'll learn in this episode, we can never be too comfortable with these situations, and we should, always expect the unexpected. But hey, without some level of unpredictability, there'd be no need for this show, and the simulation would make me fade away into the ether. So instead, I'll take a look at the evolving linebacker situations around the league, some key safety situations, as well as an important waiver target on the defensive line. So buckle in because we're going to look at it all here. And as always, if there are like situations or players you want to hear more about that I don't cover here, feel free to shout them out in the comment section. I'll do my best to highlight them in some way. Otherwise, this will be our top 10-ish takeaways for the week, and we'll have the IDP Fantasy Report out on Tuesday around noon Eastern time, which will have the snap counts, data, notes, waiver targets, all that kind of stuff for the entire week, which you can get access to with a PFF Plus subscription, and you'll get access to rankings, our fantasy rankings, IDP, and the many pieces of content that we offer here over at PFF. Okay. Let's get into it. And as the title of this episode would suggest, we have to start with the Tennessee Titans because after 3 straight games of Jack Gibbons playing full-time snaps and prior to each week, me feeling like a little bit hesitant about fully embracing him because of Jerome Baker's potential involvement lurking, I finally gave in last week before, basically finally feeling better about Jack Gibbons as a trustworthy IDP asset. And well, the Titans, they full on rope-a-doped us, but basically, right, by lulling us into a false sense of security with Gibbons before they essentially pulled the rug out from under us, because of course they did, right? This is just how these things go. So in this game here in week 11, not only did Jerome Baker get on the field, but he played a pretty significant role, enough so that Jack Gibbons barely saw the field. And that was even prior to his injury, where he was carted off with like a broken ankle. It looks like he'll be done anyway. So the final snap shares resulted in an 85% snap share for Jerome Baker, 15% snap share for Gibbons, while Kenneth Murray played 100%. But even prior to the injury, Gibbons only saw the field for 26% of the total snaps prior to that point. So now we adjust again because after Gibbons basically worked his way into that kind of LB2 range in the rankings this past week, he's now droppable, unless you have like an IR spot. But again, he's probably not going to be useful as long as Jerome Baker's also in the lineup here along with Kenneth Murray, right? So even if he gets back, which, I mean, thinking about it, a broken ankle here, he's not coming back. He's completely useless for redraft this year, right? So we move on from him. But yeah, I think, just a good highlight of how quickly things can kind of change in the NFL and for IDP, and a good reminder that we should always bake these possibilities into our expectations a little bit. As difficult as that can be to predict at times, it was something that was baked into the rankings of Gibbons the last 3 weeks. But again, they rope-a-doped us, and now here we are. So onwards we go, and we could look to add Jerome Baker off waivers where needed and available. So actually, let's stick with the theme here of keeping in mind the lurking potential of these linebackers with starting ability. I think it's kind of worth turning our attention to the Miami Dolphins, who signed Tyrell Dodson this week and released David Long. Now, Dodson did not factor in this week, but if we learned anything from this Tennessee Jerome Baker situation, it's something we always have to be on the lookout for and understand the risk of Anthony Walker potentially losing his snaps to Dodson at some point, right? The problem is, unless this team is nice enough to let us know that it's going to happen, which rarely happens, we might never know when it's going to happen. Hell, it could happen 3 weeks from now or in the fantasy playoffs. So that's fun and not stressful at all, right? So for people who are starting Anthony Walker and you potentially have no other options, you might feel a little bit better after starting him, about starting him after this week, because he basically played every snap, but I think one. Jordan Brooks played 100%. again, you might feel a little bit better about starting him, but just remember that there is at least the chance on any given week that Dodson could get snaps. And even if it's not more than Walker, like it could be enough to cut into his workload, basically. So just thought this was a good situation to highlight here following the debacle in Tennessee, basically. All right, let's take a look at Tyrell Dodson's former team next, the Seattle Seahawks, who left a hole in the middle of their defense, obviously, with their green dot signal caller being gone and shifting to Ernest Jones, who's only been on the team for what, a month? He's now the green dot, continues to play out a 100% snap role. But there's another linebacker spot next to him, which belongs to fifth-round rookie Tyrese Knight. Which was as expected, but also as expected, it is not the full-time 100% snap role that Tyrell Dodson and even Jerome Baker were playing before him when they were in the lineup. But instead, Dodson played 81% of snaps, which we expected based on him getting some playing time earlier this season. And we kind of saw what that usage was, got deployed that way, and he was not playing on like third down and those obvious passing downs. So that was the same thing again this week. He had a nice game, 10 tackles, but again, more of a deep league option if you don't have any other 100% snap linebackers available to you. And speaking of which, you might be able to find a couple here in Detroit, where we were going to highlight the Lions linebackers no matter what this week, because Malcolm Rodriguez was back in the lineup after missing 3 straight. And things did change because in that 3-game span, obviously we've covered it each week pretty much, Jack Campbell was playing a full-time role, even got to 100% of snaps last week, but the final hurdle was going to be if Rodriguez was going to cut into that snap share. And at first he did, and he didn't, right? So now Alex Anzalone, I'll say he broke his arm in this game. He'll be out 6 to 8 weeks. But before that injury happened, there were 20 snaps played. Jack Campbell played 16 of them. Rodriguez played 18 of them. Anzalone played all of them. Now, obviously, Rodriguez played more than Anzalone, but the reason I say that he did and he didn't cut into his snaps was because Rodrigo played half of his snaps on the edge. So a completely different role, basically, which is something we've kind of talked about being a killer for tackle efficiency this past week on the preview show in regards to Foye Oluokun. But then after the Anzalone injury, we saw that usage go away a bit for him on the defensive line. It looks like he may have only played 7 more snaps there through the remaining 28 snaps or so once Anzalone was out of the game. But still, you'll notice that make a difference in these 2 linebackers' tackle rates for this game. So ultimately, with the Anzalone injury factored in, Jack Campbell played 94% of snaps. Rodriguez played 90% of snaps. So Campbell overtook Rodriguez in snaps following the Anzalone injury, playing every snap with him out of the game, while Rodriguez moved into like the more traditional off-ball linebacker role. Now, Campbell certainly becomes the priority off the waiver wire this week, where he's available if you haven't already scooped him up. But again, after playing 3 straight weeks of full-time snaps, he's likely not widely available. But Rodriguez is definitely an option as well, since he should be playing something resembling that Jack Campbell role that we've been watching over these past three games prior to this one. So it's definitely a big boost to Campbell's rest of season value as the team's lead linebacker now, especially as a much more efficient tackler than what Alex Anzalone has been for his career. So this could be great for him and his IDP managers, obviously, and Rodriguez definitely a sneakier option as well, but he could also have like a decent value in this new role. So both of those guys are options here going forward. Okay, we just referenced Foye Oluokun, so let's move to our usual Jacksonville Jaguars linebacker update. And I want to point out quickly that with the Lions blowing them out, there was a bunch of garbage time in this game where the starters came out. So I've eliminated the stretch of garbage time from the snap counts in this week's chart to kind of get a clear picture of how these guys were utilized in the normal rotation of the game. Now, Foye led the way as usual, playing 97% of snaps prior to garbage time. And like we talked about in the preview show, he spent 16% of those snaps on the edge slash defensive line, which again is kind of that killer for tackle efficiency compared to the typical off-ball linebacker alignment. And then 16% of those snaps, like it might not seem like a huge deal, but it adds up as the year goes on, basically, right? And you'll see him not necessarily reach those LB1 type numbers because of this type of usage. Devin Lloyd played 87% of snaps prior to garbage time, and he stayed on, I think, played 100% of snaps in garbage time as well. So that number ultimately is going to be a lot higher, but 87% in the normal rotation. Not the tackle output that he was able to come through with last week, only 5 tackles. Pretty inefficient day all around for the Jags linebackers. I might not highlight this group again since it's kind of remained status quo here since Foye's returned from injury, but thought it was worth following up on Foye Oluokun's overall usage, since it was something that I talked about on the preview show with him getting that heavy defensive line work. So that's Jacksonville. New England is up next. Looking at their linebacker situation this time, I touched on it at some point this past week. I can't remember now if it was the recap or the preview show. They're blending together here, fellas. But talking about how when they have their linebackers healthy, they want to rotate these guys. And that's what we saw this week with Christian Ellis returning to the lineup. Last week, obviously, they were without Christian Ellis. Jelani Tavai played 100% of snaps. They also had no Raekwon McMillan. He was released. And Sione Takitaki got injured in that game last week as well. So they had no choice but to roll with Tavai for 100% of snaps last week. But this week was different because Tavai, Ellis, and Takitaki were healthy in this game, which led to that rotation that they clearly want to run at the position, because Tavai and Ellis both played with Tavai at 81% of snaps, Ellis at 69% of snaps, nice, and Takitaki saw 35% of snaps. So that's always kind of the concern with this New England linebacker core, because they like to take their guys off the field. None of them really stand out as like capable, true 3-down role type players. So it makes sense that they'll look to shift these guys around based on situation, and that's exactly what they're doing. So they're options for deep leagues only. Looking at the Browns linebackers now, because one of the players we talked about actually potentially lurking for a significant role and cutting into one of our waiver wire linebackers was Jordan Hicks versus Mohamed Diabate. And Hicks finally returned this week. He played a full-time snap share right away, 100% of snaps compared to Diabate's 80% of snaps. This was something we talked about basically each time this Browns linebacker core minus JOK has been brought up. And I've written about it in the IDP fantasy report as well. So it's not much of a surprise that Hicks led the way in terms of snaps. I think the only chance that wasn't going to happen was if the Browns eased him back into the lineup coming off injury, but clearly wasn't the case. Neither guy really did much in this game. I think 7 tackles for Diabate, 6 for Hicks. Hicks will be a waiver wire option, though. He should be widely available considering he's been out for so long and he wasn't a 100% snap linebacker prior to getting injured. So be on the lookout for him on the waiver wire as well. Jordan Hicks, that is. Okay, let's move on to the Los Angeles Rams next, because these guys have a lot going on as usual. We'll start with the linebackers to wrap up that position group for today, and then a quick look at the safeties as well. But linebackers first, and man, this group sucks for IDP. Last week it was Omar Spates leading the way. The week before that it was the Jalen McCullough mirage, and then this week we're back to Christian Roseboom, and neither guy is anywhere close to a full-time role. The Rams played 12% of their defensive snaps without an actual linebacker, like by trade, on the field. No other team does that in the league. So they are special in that way. So there was no Roseboom, no Spates, no Hummel on the field. We did get Christian Roseboom for 65% of snaps, Spates for 55% of snaps, and then like a 5% pity snap share for Jake Hummel. So these guys are all deep league options only, even though Roseboom was very efficient with his snaps. He had 11 tackles, but that bust potential is it's a lot higher each week if his snap share remains that low. And it's also possible that Troy Reeder gets back in the lineup soon as well. Hopefully, which is something I never thought I'd say about Troy Reeder, that hopefully he can get back out there, because maybe we can get at least one full-time linebacker for IDP purposes. But until then, it just doesn't seem very likely here with the Rams. So with linebackers off the field, that typically means more DBs would come onto the field to replace them. And specifically looking at the team's safeties here, because there was another shift in the Rams safety rotation after Cam Curl and Cam Kinchins were rotating last week. Curl went back to his full-time snap share, playing every snap, while Kinchins played 55% of snaps. Kinchins had a really nice IDP day. He had the interception in there as well, but only 55% of snaps. So for Cam Curl, maybe it was injury related or something, but at the same time, this team has shown us that they can't seem to make up their mind with defensive personnel. Hopefully this sticks and he's just the 100% snap player, but just because that makes things easier for IDP, but who knows with the Rams. So this is our latest sample size of it here. Quentin Lake, Cameron Curl, both playing 100% of snaps. Now, the only thing with Curl going back to a full-time role alongside Quentin Lake is that they kind of nerfed that role to the point where he only played 18% in the box and 66% deep, 12% in the slot. So compared to Lake, 17% in the box, so a little bit less in the box than Curl, but only 28% deep compared to 66% for Curl. So 54% of Quentin Lake's snaps were spent in the slot. That usage was what we were getting from the Rams at the beginning of the season, basically. And Lake continues to capitalize on the role that he's been given in this defense. Nice 11 tackle game here, just the 4 tackles for Curl. But Curl is at least more playable now because he's back to full-time snaps, but it's Lake that we continue to favor for IDP, both because of how productive he's been and now the better usage as well. Okay, on to Baltimore next, where Kyle Hamilton was questionable earlier in the week after suffering that like nasty ankle injury on Thursday Night Football in Week 10. I thought he might miss at least one game, but apparently not, which was great to see. Hamilton was great in this game. He did leave the game for like one snap, but he was able to get back in there, which was great. So the other part of this situation, the safety situation specifically that I want to highlight, is that it seems Eddie Jackson's days might be done in Baltimore. They left him at home for this road game, and it was not injury related. And then Marcus Williams was active for this game, but he only played the one snap that Hamilton was unable to play. So he's also been benched again. I talked about it in the preview show, how they played like a 3 safety look last week quite a bit. And that wasn't the case this week. And instead, it was only Hamilton and Ardarius Washington as the starters. So I had highlighted Washington in the IDP report as a waiver target last week because of his snap share within that 3 safety look. But now his role is looking potentially even more secure here as the Ravens make this shift in their defensive secondary. Washington played 66% per our early unreviewed data deep. But 66% deep. He played 100% of total snaps. But that's based on our unreviewed data. But I do figure that's going to hold here as far as leading the team in deep safety snaps. Hamilton played quite a bit deep this week as well because the Ravens went back to Marlon Humphrey in the slot. So took away a lot of those snaps from Hamilton, and he ended up with about 25% in the box, Hamilton did. So we'll see how that looks going forward, but it makes sense that if the team has moved on from Marcus Williams and Eddie Jackson as starters, then moving Humphrey in the slot and then having your 2 full-time safeties as well as 2 full-ish time linebackers, then we could see Hamilton and Washington kind of stick deeper, but we'll see how things go. For now, Washington continues to be a waiver wire option for those in need. Also quickly worth noting that Roquan Smith did get hurt late in this game and did not return. So Malik Harrison stepped into a lot more snaps because of it. So not sure the extent of the injury, but if Roquan is going to miss time, Harrison will be a waiver wire option as well in what could be close to a full-time role. Okay, Deshaun Elliott of the Pittsburgh Steelers is the next IDP in question this week, and another one that I just want to follow up on after highlighting him in the preview show. And once again, Elliott was not an every down player for the Steelers defense, and it sapped his production in a big way. Only 2 total tackles for Elliott in this game. He did have a fumble recovery, but that low tackle risk, even in a great matchup for safety tackles, just becomes so much riskier when there's already a low snap count for the game. And for a part-time player now like Elliott, who played just 75% of snaps again, because they're essentially taking him off the field on third down and obvious passing down, something they really do with their linebackers as well outside of Patrick Queen. They do the same thing here recently, 3 weeks in a row with their safeties outside of Minkah Fitzpatrick. So Elliott did play 43% of his snaps in the box, which, you know, it could sometimes help him with that 75-ish% snap share, but more in like a game with a lot more snaps in it, because 75% for him in this game only equaled 46 snaps and 20 in the box. That's just not what we're looking for here. So 3 weeks in a row is only going to keep dropping Elliott further down the ranks. He was the overall safety 9 in IDP scoring coming into this week, but this usage it's going to sink him quite a bit going forward, assuming it holds. And lastly, let's stick with the Pittsburgh Steelers really quick, because I want to look at their edge group again. It's where we wrapped up last week, so let's do it again as a follow-up, because with Alex Highsmith out 2 to 3 weeks now, it's worth looking at who stepped up into what has been a workhorse edge role in this defense. And I highlighted Preston Smith as someone who could get a boost last week, partly because Nick Herbig hadn't played since like week 5, but with Highsmith out, Herbig was back in, and he played 82% of the defensive snaps. Preston Smith only played 28%. Now, neither guy really made like a huge IDP impact, though Herbig got like a forced fumble in there, but no sacks, not many tackles, and I think just 1 QB hit between them. I can't remember who got it, probably Herbig. So there's at least a chance that Herbig kind of flies under the radar on your waiver wire, but this is a really nice spot, I think, to target him this week, get him on your roster, and you could potentially even start him next week in a great matchup against the Cleveland Browns. We all know what they've been in pass protection as far as giving up sacks. So he's going to be a high-end fill-in option next week, especially with 6 teams on a bye in week 12. So keep an eye out for Nick Herbig on your waiver wire, everybody else that we mentioned as well. But that's going to do it for me this week and for our main IDP takeaways. Again, be sure to check out the IDP fantasy report, which will be out Tuesday afternoon again. I'll try to remember to pin that in the comments of this video. And then Thursday morning, as always, I'll be going game by game in the IDP Start Sit show, and we'll cover plenty in there as well. So thank you all for tuning in. If you'd be so kind to like and subscribe to the channel, I'd really, really appreciate it. Or leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It means a lot to me. Thank you guys all so much for doing that already and continuing to support the show. It means the world to me. Massive thank you to the PFF data collection team as well, without whom this data would be possible. So yeah, as always, feel free to ask questions in the comments. And until next time, peace out.